Well, it's raining outside. We had a heavy rainstorm overnight here. And you know what that means? It means it's the perfect time for a car video. Get in the car and make a video when it's still raining, Tim, right? I wanted to talk a little bit about what we've been discussing the last couple of videos in regards to technique. I will put a link above to the last two videos. To the first video where I was reading that Neville quote from his lecture in 1966. That link will be above. Basically saying that, you know, he does all these techniques and that the techniques are just figurative. That the point of the techniques is just to basically get him into the state he wants to be in. But it's not, the technique in and of itself has no power at all. I thought that was fascinating. So fascinating that I made a second video talking about it. I'll put the link above to that one as well. Just expanding upon that idea. And now we have the third video in this mini-series of technique, anti-technique videos. And this is something I've spoken about a lot, especially on the podcast, you know. Namely, I'll put a link above to one more, an old podcast episode. I think it's called You Are the Technique. And that's what so much of this is about. And I think that's something that we have trouble understanding when we first get into these LOA, law of assumption ideas, because the techniques seem so fascinating and wonderful, particularly like Neville's. I mean, Neville's, like Israel Regardie said, like Neville's techniques seem the most magical of all, right? The techniques seem so phenomenal, and there's something so fantastical about, you know, these approaches to improving your life, that it's like, it's very easy to get swept away by the techniques or by the teacher themselves. And the hard thing is to realize that it's not really the technique or the teacher. It's you that's doing this, that's making this work. And that can be hard to realize at first. And then it's the kind of thing that also we have to remind ourselves of again and again, that it's the technique, that it's not the technique, that the technique is just pointing to us, to the changes that we want to make. And we are in charge on a practical level of making those changes, and that the technique is not going to do it for us. We are going to do it for ourselves. And so what that does is it does so many things, but it gives us back the power instead of the technique having the power, instead of a certain teacher like Neville or Abraham Hicks or whoever having the power. It gives us the power back. But it also gives us the power back. So it's good and bad, you know, because we realize, wait a minute, this technique's great and it might do something, but it's really me who's doing it. Me. You know? As Neville would say, your own wonderful human imagination. It's you yourself. It's you imaginatively, emotionally, psychologically doing it to yourself. And that is why for many of us, the majority of us who get into this stuff, one single technique or even a couple techniques are not always going to work the same way or always be successful for you to implement. Because you're not trying to successfully implement a technique. You're trying to successfully implement you, if that makes any sense. And this is so much of the practice. I mean, if you're new to this channel, I really recommend looking at my book, The Law of Attraction Simplified, which I wrote a couple of years ago. And it talks about this process. And right at the beginning of the book, I say you can do whatever technique you want. They're all good. Whatever technique you want. Because the technique, this sounds strange, but the technique is really just a small part of the process. The real process is assuming and feeling better and figuring out how to do that and feeling more fulfilled in our day-to-day life and assuming the state that we want to be in more of the time and, assuming that what we want to happen is going to happen. and to understand that a bunch of crap is probably going to come up, quote unquote resistance, that we're going to have to move through while we're assuming these things we want, while we're assuming that something good is going to happen, even when externally it doesn't seem like anything good is going to happen. That's the work. It's not a freaking technique. The techniques are all great, but it's not about doing a certain technique at a certain time. And you have to figure out what technique works for you, because it's going to be different depending on who you are or where you are in your life. For instance, like if I'm in a contemplative kind of relaxed mood already, just vibing out the way I talk about in The Joy of Not Thinking or talk about on the podcast all the time works really well. Just vibing out, just being there, or just literally sitting, as I was talking about a lot this past summer, is like a meditation practice, like just sitting in a comfortable place on the couch and not trying to do anything, just allowing myself to sit for like 10 or 15 minutes and like not doing anything to change anything. Just doing that is very powerful when I'm already kind of like in a relaxed state, obviously, but also just kind of like a neutral state. Like I'm just living my day-to-day life and I want to like take like a break from the action and just sit down and kind of vibe or just be there. Works very effectively. But if I'm stressed out, if I have something going on that's stressing me out, or if I just feel very anxious or stressed, that's probably, sometimes it will. This is, again, part of the nuance of this. Sometimes it will help me just to sit like that for 15 minutes then, for sure. But a lot of the time, it won't seemingly help that much when I do that. What will help is vigorously moving around or talking out loud to myself in a very animated way. And, that's just stuff I figured out over time. Those are techniques that work for me at certain times and don't work for me well at other times. And, for me, a lot of the quote unquote law of assumption is that. It's like I'm assuming the best to the best of my abilities, right? And then I'm just doing these techniques, like Neville talks about. I'm doing whatever technique I can to help me assume the best. But it's not like I'm doing SATs, or like affirming something. Thank you, it's wonderful. And don't get me wrong, I like to utilize affirmations sometimes. We speak about this plenty. Sometimes I like to do robotic affirmations. But if I'm feeling really stressed out, robotic affirmations are not my go-to. They might be your go-to. See the nuance here? It depends who you are. It depends on your sensibility. It depends where you are right now, which is different than where you'll be tomorrow or where you'll be next week. Again, this is the benefit of being honest with yourself and having, frankly, like a coach or somebody to bounce stuff off of. People come to me so I can verify that they're not doing anything wrong a lot of the time. Or I can verify they are doing something wrong by being too stuck in doing a certain technique. They say, I'm doing affirmations and nothing's happening. And, I ask, are you liking doing them? Do they feel good when you do them usually? And they say, no, it feels forced. And I'm like, well, you don't have to do them then. We can do something else. And then we talk about stuff they can do that feels better, right? Or they say, I'm not really doing any particular technique, but like I'm just trying to kind of relax into the moment as I go about my day. And I ask them, does that feel good? And they say, yeah, it feels pretty good, but should I be doing something else? Do I need to be doing more? I say, no. If it feels good, if you're assuming the best, then that's it. That's all you have to do. It's nice to have that verified. I know that firsthand because I love getting coached and getting mentored or whatever you want to call it as much as I can. And a big reason I like that is just so someone can verify to me that I'm not doing anything wrong. Or if something feels off for me, they can verify why it feels off. And when something feels off to me, a lot of times it's because I'm trying to force a technique when no technique is needed, or a different approach would be better suited and make me feel better. This is all stuff to remember. So techniques are great. We talk a lot about them on the podcast and, on this YouTube channel. And there's so many different fascinating techniques. But I'm a big believer in ultimately the only technique is yourself. And this ties in directly with I think my new book is going to come out this week. It's going to be launched sometime in the next week or so. And in this book, which is called Money Your Friend, which hopefully a lot of you will read, I was almost reticent because it took a long time to write and to edit. And I share 2 specific techniques in the book. And I'm telling you this now because it's interesting in the light of what I just said. The techniques are pointing to something that is not about the technique. So in this book, which we'll be talking much more about this in the coming weeks, as it launches. But in this book, I basically say, if you want to follow this advice for a month, if you want to feel better about money and you want a simple way to do it, a simple technique and process to do it, here are things you can do for the next 30 days that will help you. But I make it pretty clear throughout the book that it's not the 2 specific recommendations I give that are really helping you. It's those 2 recommendations, hopefully, and I feel very confident especially if you're newer to this stuff, what it will do is will make you feel differently, and make you feel differently about money, and make you feel differently about what supply is, and what your sense of fulfillment really is, and what you care most about, which certainly is not money. That's what those techniques point to. But the techniques in and of themselves don't mean shit. Yeah. So there's a lot of nuance, Nuance is what's interesting about this stuff. Not to say the techniques are not interesting, but the nuances in implementing them subjectively into your life based on your sensibility is a lot more interesting once you get into this stuff, at least for most of us. So, yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. I can be reached at info@radicalcounselor.com or on my website, radicalcounselor.com. I've been responding to some comments lately, which I usually don't do, so I might continue to do that. But if you have a question for me or would like coaching, it's always better to reach me at my email, info@radicalcounselor.com. And yeah, look out for the book. It will be coming sometime very soon, and I think you will enjoy it, and we will discuss it a lot more on this channel. It looks like the rain is subsiding, and with that, I must go. Until next time, be technique-less, ultimately. Just be here now and feel good.